Good evening.
Good to have you back with us. You've really got all the travel classes today.
Yes, I do.
Oh, you're ready. Where do you want to go to when you travel?
Well, now I want to go to that town where Mark lived by Guadalajara.
Ajijic. Yeah.
As of yesterday, that's where I want to go.
I want to go there too.
Yeah.
It's at 5,000 feet above
Uh-huh.
sea level, and there's all sorts of hiking. There's also a huge expatriate community there from the US, Canada.
Yeah, it sounds really good.
Hi, John. Good evening. Good to see you. Hi, Mary Ellen and Linda and Jean and Gina and Leslie. Hi, May. How are you? Good to have everyone back this evening.
Hi.
I had never heard of that town before, but now that's where I want to go.
And did you see how it's spelled?
Yes.
Yeah, I never heard of it till I met Mark, and now I know a lot about it. So I hope someday to get down there. I have a long-term ambition starting next year to spend 2 weeks in Mexico in the winter to warm my bones. Usually by mid-February, I'm kind of ready for it. If that late, maybe for February 1st, I'm ready for a change. And 3 years ago, we went to Colombia for 2 weeks. Last week of January and the first week of February, my wife and I went because we had a son living there and a daughter-in-law. And it was really nice in January and February, very delightful. I always say that Bogota, where they lived, is the land of eternal spring. It's like every day is the day in the middle of spring there, how it feels, the temperature and the climate. So after that, I thought that's kind of a nice thing to go somewhere like that. And so I think next year it'll be Mexico. I could go back to Colombia easily. In fact, I will do a class sometime on coffee farms in Colombia, because we took a tour of 2 coffee plant farms, not plantations, 2 coffee farms. They call them fincas. And we really loved the coffee region of Colombia. It's kind of in between 2 ranges of the Andes, and it's really temperate climate, and one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. So I would go back there easily. Hi, Leslie and Nancy and Jeannie and Carmen and Carolyn. Good to have you all back with us this evening to learn and maybe share about traveling safely, because this class is also where we learn from each other. So any of you who are experienced travelers can share your travel tips about traveling safely. And I encourage you to put those tips in the chat while the class is going on. Of course, there'll also be chances for me to ask you questions, any of you to share about what you know about traveling safely. So should be a very good class. We'll give it about 2 more minutes for more people to join in, and then we'll go ahead and start. I know quite a few of you from classes before. A lot of you look familiar. Anybody here, just you can unmute yourself and answer this question. Anybody here right now got a trip planned?
A little one.
Well, what's the little trip?
My little trip is to Saugatuck, Michigan.
Well, that's good.
I'm going to Expo. The School of the Art Institute is up there in the sand dunes.
Okay, that sounds
So
very
fingers
interesting.
crossed that everything goes smoothly.
Okay. How about you, John?
We're in Michigan, and we're traveling with daughter, son-in-law, and granddaughter and significant other to Oregon in August.
Ah, yes. That's
A little bit of wine country on that trip.
Oregon is beautiful. I've been there several times. My sister lives there. She lives in Portland, and my niece, and I love Portland.
Good.
I lived for 5 years in Idaho, Boise, Idaho, which is borders Oregon. Idaho does, and got over there several times. And I really, really loved the Pacific Northwest. So very different climate. If you're from if you're from the east or the Midwest, it feels like home in places in the Willamette Valley. But as soon as you head east in the state, it gets dry and arid. It's high desert, and that's beautiful. So anybody else got a trip planned?
I'm scheduled to go to Egypt since my trip was canceled last year.
Right.
So hopefully I'll be going in December.
December, you're going to Egypt. Good for you. That'll be a little bit of a learning curve about traveling to Egypt.
Well, last year I was in Morocco, so I think the experience might be a little bit similar.
It might be. I think you're right. It might be a little bit similar. Carolyn, you've got your hand raised. You got a trip planned?
No, but I wanted to caution the gentleman, I think it was John, that's going to Oregon. Check out, because they're having another round of COVID, and they were talking about shutting things down big time again.
Oh dear. Well, yeah. Well, I'll show you tonight.
We'll keep an eye on it.
I'll show you tonight. The first order of business this evening will be to look at where you can find health information.
My friend's son is scheduled to get married there in July, and they're a little bit frazzled.
Okay. Ooh. Leslie, have you got a trip planned?
Yes, I'm going to Maui June 15th.
Did you say
And
Maui?
Right, Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know I have to have a test within 72 hours. And that part is concerning me to make sure that I get the right kind of test. And then you have to fill out a health questionnaire too. So to get all the information correct, so I'm not sent back home.
Yeah, you really don't want to have that happen.
No.
No. Hi, Carmen. Welcome, Liz. Good to have more folks with us. I'm going to go ahead. Several were just sharing about places they hope to travel to, and I'll give all of the rest of you another opportunity to do that later in the hour. Hi, Jeannie. Welcome back. She was in our solo travel class this afternoon. Now we're in a safe travel. They kind of relate to each other.
I'm planning to go to France, but they tell me that they are not receiving foreigners. So that's one question I have. Where do you go and ask when they are going to receive people? And also I travel alone. So if there are any safety tips for people who go alone, because I know you travel with your wife and that makes certain things easier.
And I've also traveled alone, but it's different for a man than it is for a woman.
For
So
sure.
if a woman were teaching this class, she'd have some things to say. So I've tried to take into account some things that I know women say, because we have a lot of participants in our class and they've given me a lot of great insights and input. Been very helpful.
To hear those.
Very good. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. And again, we'll have more opportunities later to share with each other. And if everyone would mute your microphone while I'm presenting, unless you need to speak, put your questions tonight in chat. However, I will at times also invite you to please raise questions, because I'm going to show you some things today, and you'll probably have questions when I want to show you something, especially on the web. So you probably are seeing something that says traveling safely. Does that appear there? Very good. Very good. I'm Russ Eanes, your guide. I'm from Harrisonburg, Virginia. I'm a writer, a walker, and a cyclist, and I used to be a book publisher. And when I was a book publisher, my favorite thing was to help authors shape their ideas into books. And now I'm a full-time guide with Get Set Up, and I love the energy I get and the wisdom I collect from working with older adults like you. So thanks for being here tonight. Get Set Up helps you learn all sorts of useful skills. We had a lot of great testimonials earlier about things people are learning on Get Set Up, and I hope you all learning some travel skills through all the travel classes. I've still got more new classes coming up. There's one called When Can We Go Where? So that'll incorporate a bit of this discussion tonight about pandemic safety travel. That'll be in that class. I can't tell you now exactly when you can go where, because it's always changing, but I can at least show you where you can find the resources. We learn from each other in these classes, so ideally we can see you and your cameras are on. You can all request a recording of this class after the class. You can email help@getsetup.io. And if anyone is joining by live stream, the best way to participate is to join us and to register for a class. And lastly, Get Set Up's not paid to promote any specific products. Now, when I'm going to talk about safe travel tonight, and you again, you all can give your input into it, I'm going to be talking primarily about three things. First one is staying healthy. That means physically healthy, not as in not sick healthy, or maybe not falling and breaking your leg healthy. Secondly, we're going to be talking about protecting yourself from physical harm. And lastly, we're going to talk about protecting valuables, because that's something that a lot of people have questions about when they travel. How do I keep my valuables safe? So the first thing I always tell people when they're considering going somewhere, and this is relating to all the areas of safety that I mentioned, is know the risks of where you are going. Okay. So Gina mentioned, I think, going to Egypt today. So you need to study up a little bit and know about what are the risks about traveling to Egypt. A good source of learning this are guidebooks, travel forums, and when you get somewhere is the advice of locals. And you can also follow some online links, and I'll show you a few of those online links in just a second. But really study up where you're going. And if you know those risks, you can keep yourself safe. We can't ever guarantee that nothing bad will ever happen to you. But from all the bad stories I've heard from people over the years, the majority comes from folks not knowing about the risks. And maybe those risks were, hey, I was in the bad part of the city that night. I didn't know I shouldn't be there. I didn't know I shouldn't be there at that time. Or they were in a place that was kind of dangerous. I'm talking about physically dangerous, like maybe they were climbing on some cliffs or something. And they said, well, I didn't know that those things weren't safe that I was climbing on. But you can usually find the risks of anything with a little bit of research before you go. And that's the best way to keep safe. Now, as we want to stay healthy coming out of the pandemic, we all have been home mostly for the last year. I'm actually about to get on an airplane in June for the first time. That'll be, I think, about 20 months since I was last on a plane. I came home from Italy in 2019. That was the last time I flew. And I've now got some reservations to fly to Maine, just to go up to Portland, Maine, Washington Dulles Airport, hour and a half flight. And so maybe in a few weeks, I can share with you all my experience of going through the airport for the first time. But there are several sites that can give you the most current information about travel destinations or just about the risks of the pandemic and traveling. And I'll show you all three of these. One is a site called Travel Requirements, which is kept up by Raleigh Durham Airport. Apparently it's a really good site and has fairly current information. And so you'll get the link to that in your class notes at the end. I will show you that site as well. Another site to look at is CDC, Center for Disease Control. They have a site where they share a lot about traveling and the pandemic and risks right now. And the third one is a site that I've come across, maintained by just some independent folks, called Travel Bans. And they, again, have country-specific information. I like it because you can sort of glance at it, you can look at it and at a glance, you can see all the necessary information that you need to know about travel to that country. Destination countries also have their own information, which they ideally keep current for travelers who are coming there. And lastly, before we go look at some of those sites, you also have to be aware of the restrictions that you may have coming back into the United States. And again, like everything else, it's a changing target. Things can change from day to day, week to week, hour to hour. But right now, I understand you have to have a negative test that was 3 days before you return to the U.S. So if you're thinking of going out of the country and, oops, I got some light on my face. If you're thinking of going out in the country and coming back in, make sure you look up that so that you know what you need to do. Because again, as someone mentioned before, you don't want to get somewhere and discover you can't get in. So you don't want to leave the country and then discover when you're at the airport somewhere in the US, they won't let you back in for some reason. I think those of you that were in our class with Mark Miller yesterday, who was sharing about Ajijic, Mexico, he told me that there were rapid tests they were taking. So he could take a rapid test and then give a negative result. So let me go out to the websites here. I'm going to adjust my light for 1 second. So this first one, Travel Requirements from Raleigh Durham Airport, looks like this. You go there and all sorts of airport information, but the one that's really pertinent to what we're talking about is this one called travel requirements right down here. Everybody see a map of the US with different colors, and the dark blue means that state is open to all visitors. And I imagine this has been changing over the year. Carolyn, I see your question. I'll come to you in just a second. I imagine this has been changing over the year. The light blue means there are some restrictions, and you're going to have to investigate each of those. So for example, I'm going to Maine in June. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to look at Maine and click on it and see what the travel restrictions are. It says it's open with restrictions, quarantine not required, COVID-19 test, vaccination, or test or vaccination is not required. Forms or applications are not required. Health insurance not required. I'm not sure what's required. We could click on more information and see what it is. So there's, again, I will peruse this. See, there's the little bit of restriction. Face coverings are required. So that's something that I need to know before I go to Maine. Also, that restaurants are open with limitations and bars and cafes are open with limitations. Carolyn, did you have a question about this or anything I've presented so far?
Yes, I wanted to go back to your comment on Mark saying they were given the quick test.
Rapid test, yes.
Who's paying for those? I assume
that
you.
is a very good question. He just said that, and I didn't think to ask him where he'd gotten the rapid test done. There are some rapid tests developed, which are very inexpensive. I'm not aware that those are widely available, even though they could be. Most of us have been relying on the fact that we're getting vaccinated. So that's a good question. And I am going to ask him that, Carolyn. Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
So this is just good to know. So I found out the restrictions on Maine. Actually, I went there last August. That was the only out-of-state trip I took all of 2020 was to go to Maine. And I did find out that one of the restrictions was that by being in the state, I had to be quarantined for 2 weeks. And so the whole entire time we're there, we didn't go anywhere indoors, no restaurants or anything like that. We didn't hang out with anybody. We were just with my son and daughter-in-law and our grandson. Carmen, do you have a question?
Can you go into World Map to see what there is?
Yes, I'm going to show you the world map in just a second. Yep.
Okay.
So I just was showing you about the U.S. because that's what most of us, it sounds like, are planning to do tonight is to travel to the U.S. And Gina was going to Hawaii, so there's Hawaii over there. You can check on it. So if we click on world map, now we get a very different picture of the world, and we can go out and look at specific countries. So let's say you want to go to Ireland. So let's just move this out of the way here. So I can zoom my map in right here. And let's zoom in on Ireland right there, because that's about the closest place you can get. And here are the restrictions for Ireland. It says it's open with restrictions. Quarantine may be required. A COVID-19 test and vaccination are required. So that when we get into more info, we'll look at that. Forms or applications are required and health insurance is not required. So when I dig into more information, this is last updated May 11th. So that's pretty up-to-date information. That's yesterday. Entry requirements in Ireland. Fully vaccinated passengers. It says international travel to Ireland is permitted for fully vaccinated passengers, but there are some restrictions related to quarantine and COVID-19. I won't read it all to you. You can look this up later. You'll get this link. But it looks like there are some restrictions, and you have to bring proof of vaccination. And you may be asked for that more than once, apparently. And this one thing I'd like to find out more here is where it says quarantine may be required. It says, it looks like if you haven't got some of these things here, like you haven't got a vaccine or maybe a negative test, that quarantine may be required. I'm not going to read all this tonight because I want to move on with other detail, but this is where you find
sounds like a for sure, I don't know.
You're right. And this is one of the things about travel right now is that we everything is changing, and certain requirements that might be in place today may be changed tomorrow. So I've actually been cautioning a lot of people to not get too many hopes up about traveling abroad this year. I would be patient. You can travel to a lot of places in the US this year. And one of the things about making plane reservations is we tend to make them well in advance of the trip because that's when the best prices are. And the fact is, things could change between now or whenever we make the reservations and when we travel. And the airlines are being flexible, allowing you to change your reservations or give you or cancel them or give you refunds. Again, you're gonna have to check your individual airline that you've making reservations on to get that information. But I want to just show this to you because this is the most useful site that I found about getting up-to-date information in the world. There's another one called Travel Bans, and this will also be linked to. You'll see the link to this in your notes, and this has very similar information, but some of the information I was looking at wasn't necessarily as up to date. It's listed country by country, and you can select it over here by continent. So we could go to South America, for example, and check Colombia, and we find that it is partially open for citizens. It is partially open for foreigners, partially open for tourism, and there's requiring a partial quarantine. So in each of these cases, we would have to start digging into the information to find out about that. This right here, some of this information from Avianca, which is one of the major airlines flying into Colombia, is only from the 18th of January. So you really need to, again, dig into all the details, find out about it. And I would say really do this before you plan on traveling so you're not caught off guard. I won't show you the CDC site, but there is more information. You can go to the Center for Disease Control. That would also be good to look for information on what might be required of you when you come back. Carmen, did you have another question? No. Okay. Very good. Thanks. So that's the first area of safety, just about keeping our physical health in a time of a pandemic. The second area of safety that a lot of us are concerned about is protecting yourself from physical harm. People don't want to get pickpocketed. They don't want to get mugged. I haven't never been harmed in all my overseas travel. I've gone to places that are relatively safe. But the first rule when you go somewhere, besides, again, doing your research in advance, is once you're on the ground, talk to the locals. Is this place safe? What time should I be in? Any suggestions about this or that? And probably the least safe country I went to was Colombia. And by the way, I felt very safe there the whole time, but it was probably the least safe place. And one way I kept safe was I was with my son, who would have been a temporary local living there for several years. He gave me lots of good information about do's and don'ts. And for example, one thing he told me not to do, this would have been about 7-8 years ago, was not to ever take a picture of a policeman. Now, since then, I would say that's worldwide advice. I wouldn't do it anywhere. Now, I'm not talking about what happens if you get stopped by policemen in the US at a traffic stop. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about when you're touring around and you see police in places. I just wouldn't take pictures. But to get back to the story of my son, we went to an area of Colombia called the Chocó, which is Afro-Colombia. It's a very poor area, very beautiful area. It's a rainforested area. We're in several large cities. And some in the rural areas around there were armed groups. And my son said he never felt unsafe from them at all. They weren't harming foreigners. They weren't interested in harming foreigners. But he did tell me a story about a group of pastors who came down from Canada to East Mina, the city that he was living in. And that group of pastors was touring a cooperative farm that they were providing money for. So they were actually in that region of Colombia. They were helping the locals transition, the local farmers transition from going coca, which is the plant that they make cocaine from, to cacao, which is the plant that they make chocolate out of, chocolate beans. And these pastors were part of a Canadian church group that donated money for this cooperative project to help these farmers. They were down there and they were walking all around town with big cameras looking everywhere. And they went over this bridge into a certain neighborhood and took some pictures, and then they turned around and came back. And a half an hour later, my son said one of the leaders of his in his office got a phone call from someone they didn't know, didn't even know how this person knew their cell phone number, and said, "You need to tell your visitors to stay out of that part of town and put away their cameras." So when we were in East Mena with my son, he said, "Dad, put your camera in your pocket. Don't get it out. Don't take pictures of people. Just don't take photos, because you never know who you might be taking a photo of. It might be somebody who doesn't want to have their photo taken for reasons that he didn't want to ask." He said, "Don't ask people about questions about that." I felt perfectly safe the entire time I was there, but I knew the risks of where I was going, and I talked to the locals, who in that case was my son, and he gave me excellent advice. Now, if you're going somewhere else, another just bit of advice to remember is that safety is in crowds, but remember that's also where pickpockets go. And there are different things you can do, and I'll talk a little bit about keeping your valuables safe. But we always like to take city tours. Actually, in this photo, we're in a city tour in Munich, and I actually do a class on a city tour in Munich and York. And it's always nice to be in that group. And we're obviously tourists going around, but we're smart. We've got our bags and things close to our bodies. Actually, Munich's a very, very safe city, so I wasn't worried about it. And our tour guide would have told us if we had any concerns. But the main thing is know where you're going in advance, know the risks, and when you get there, talk to the locals. Carmen, did you have a question or a comment about that?
There are also videos in YouTube that relate to the safety of the place and how you can prevent things from happening. When I went to Barcelona, I found a few of them, and as I got there, I saw a man running after a man in the bicycle, and he had been robbed. So that was my signal to go back to the hotel. But the videos were helpful.
Very good. Any more comments or questions about protecting yourself, or any experiences that anybody wants to share?
Are you going to talk about having a surprise medical emergency?
I can in a minute. First, I think John had a comment, so I'll go
Okay.
ahead and let John say something.
I just wanted to say, we were in Paris, walking around in the evening, and we got to City Hall, and we had talked to the concierge at the hotel earlier of the day, and nothing was said about anything going on. And there was a humongous crowd. The whole area in front of the City Hall was full of people. They were drinking, and they had signs, and they were starting to get a little boisterous. And that's when you got to trust your gut. We hadn't been warned, didn't know what was going on, but it just didn't feel right. So I told Nancy, I said, we've got to get out of here. So we started to walk away, and we went a block away, and there were 12 buses full of armed troops 2 blocks away. And I think those troops are there for a purpose. So sometimes you just got to, if something doesn't feel right, follow your gut.
That's right. That's right. We all have a sense about what's right and what's wrong, what's safe and what's not safe. Yep. Follow that instinct.
A lot of people are traveling across this country, and I know in some states, the locals will not use the rest stops because they're not safe.
Okay, I hadn't heard that. Carolyn, what were you asking? Was I going to talk about medical emergencies?
Yeah, I had one back in 76 when I spent a month in Europe coming back from Kenya. And I had gotten a Swiss Army knife in Switzerland, and then in the Netherlands decided to use it to trim some packing for something that I'd got so it would fit in the suitcase. Army knife slipped and I had a problem. And luckily, where I was, the guy bandaged it up, and then I thought, well, it'll be fine. Well, I unbandaged it a couple days later, and it was pretty nasty looking. So I went to, I was just staying in little local hotel type things, and they sent me to a clinic, and they said, no, we can't do stitches because it's been too long, but in the States, you'll be okay. You can get, and they rebandaged it, and it cost me $20. But they have a socialistic medicine or healthcare plan, I think.
Yes. And I have heard plenty of stories from other people. When I walked the Camino de Santiago in 2018, which is 500 miles across Spain, I was gone for 5 weeks. The first day I was walking, I met a man from the US, was from Minnesota. And he told me that the year before he had been on the same walk. And on the very first day, he slipped and fell and dislocated his shoulder pretty badly. And he required transportation to a hospital. A local helped him get to a clinic in town. That town, they said, we need to get you over to Pamplona. And he got a taxi to Pamplona, and he went in the ER in the hospital, and they fixed him up, but he decided to go home after that. He said it cost him all of $200. So I'll speak for Europe in particular. They put a higher value on medicine and healthcare, and it's usually much less expensive and frequently more available than in the US. Also, things which in the US might require a prescription don't require a prescription in many places in Europe. And I know that in 2015, I was in Ireland for 2 weeks with my wife and my sister. And I got a bad cold and developed and kind of became sort of a sinus infection the day before I was going to fly home. I knew that wasn't going to go well on an airplane. And I went into a pharmacy in Ireland, and the pharmacist gave me something really fabulous. He says, this ought to help you out tomorrow. He says, you don't want to use this too much. It's not good for you. It won't be good for your sinuses if you use it frequently at home. But he said, take some before you get on the plane. Yes, it was like a nasal spray. And he said, and then midway through the flight, take a little bit more and you should be fine. And he was right. And it was stuff that I looked up later I couldn't have gotten over the counter in the US. So that is one thing to know, that in a lot of countries, what they might give you over the counter from a pharmacist, and again, I would always get it from a pharmacist, is different than what requirements are in the US, which is a good thing to know.
It sounds like no one buys travel insurance.
No, people do buy travel insurance. Anybody here got an experience about travel insurance you want to share, Carmen?
I always buy as a preventive measure, but so far, luckily, I haven't had a chance to use it.
Good.
But I buy it so that I can be on the safe side.
Thank you.
You know, I do know people that buy it. The places I've traveled, I haven't bought travel health insurance because the insurance plan I have at home says it will cover costs. But I also know that where I've traveled, say in the UK or Germany, France, Switzerland, I know that the costs there are much less than in the US, and I'm willing to pay out of the pocket if I need some treatment up to a certain amount. You know, if I need to go into to the ER or something like that. So it's good to also check with your health insurance what might be covered while you're traveling overseas. And if you feel like you need some extra coverage, it is worth it, I think, to buy some.
They said that Medicare does not cover out of states. So then is that another incentive to kind of buy insurance?
I think, again, I would check and see if any of the Medicare supplements cover it or not. And if they don't, then that might be an incentive to purchase a short-term health insurance when you're traveling overseas, particularly if you have situations or there's some reason that you might be concerned about your health while you're there.
Yeah, one of the reasons that travel insurance was always recommended to me was if you have to get like sent back to the US.
Right.
You know, it's not so much the medical care where you're at, it's getting, you know, airlifted and put on a plane and going to a hospital and getting back home as opposed to the first available place.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Socialized medicine might be nice if it works, like most things. I have a friend whose appendix burst in Poland and would have died. There's just no question about it, because that hospital, maybe 24 hours after she had surgery, they got their allotment of supplies, so that she did have, you know, they did have things on hand then that they could help her. But if that hadn't been timed like that, she might have been in a whole different situation with the infection. So it's not always that they've got everything.
Yeah, it depends on what country you're in. I'm going to move on a little bit here. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about protecting your valuables, because this is kind of the third area of safety that a lot of people have questions about. And I would say the very first rule is to leave most of your valuables at home and or just take the minimum with you. If you're worried about something being lost or stolen, don't take it with you. My son and daughter-in-law, when they were in Colombia for 5 years, they left their wedding rings in the US. They said they never felt unsafe, but just a good precautionary measure. I wouldn't say to leave. I didn't leave my wedding ring at home when I went there, but I'm just saying that if you don't need to take valuables with you, don't take them. And that probably applies more to women than men. Women have more jewelry than men, and I understand that. But that's my first rule: is leave most of your valuables at home. Secondly, always be aware of your surroundings wherever you're traveling. Use an over-the-shoulder bag. Many of us have seen these. You can slide them around either to your front or to your back. And if you're comfortable where you are and you want to have it on your back, you can. If you're concerned about your surroundings, maybe you're on a crowded bus, then pull that bag around in front of you. I would recommend never, if possible, try not to put anything irreplaceable in that bag. Don't put your passport in there. Don't put your wallet in there or money. Put other things in there like a water bottle or a fleece that you're wearing or a hat or something like that. I probably wouldn't even put a camera in it. I have a small stuff sack that I bring, which folds up to about the size of my fist and then opens up into a pretty sizable little knapsack, ripstop. And I usually take that with me when I'm going around somewhere in a city. And I can switch around, put it in my front in a bus if I need to. Another way to keep your valuables safe is to use zippered pockets that are, especially if they're inside other pockets. So I have a couple pairs of pants that have zippered pockets inside a snapped on pocket. It would be virtually impossible for someone to get into that zippered pocket without me knowing it. And that's where I always keep my wallet. And my wallet, by the way, is very small and thin. It basically has room for a couple of credit cards and some cash. And I keep an ID in my phone. So I really only have two things I need to keep track of with my cell phone and my wallet. And I would say that leave valuables in your lodging if your lodging is safe. And when I've stayed in hostels, there's locked cabinets and I can put things in there. Sometimes hotels, often I should say, hotels have safes. Sometimes now they have safes even inside your room. You can put valuables in there. If you have a passport and your lodging feels safe, I would suggest you leave your passport in your lodgings. Now, Carolyn and Carmen have a question. Go ahead, Carolyn.
If you're in an Airbnb, would your host be offended if you asked if they had a locked place for your items?
You know, I'll tell you something. No, I don't. They shouldn't be offended. And all of the Airbnbs I've been in have locks. If I'm staying in a room in a house, they've got a lock on that door. I realize that means there's a risk that the owner could get in there, but part of the way Airbnb works is that you are trusting each other because you're rating each other. And I would say if a valuable were stolen and and the only person who could have a key would be the owner, that would make them very suspect. So I think all the Airbnbs I've been in, either where I've been in an apartment or in a room in a house, there has been a key for that so that I can keep my valuables in the room. Carmen, did you have a question or observation?
I just wanted to know which brand your pants with zippers is.
Yes, I'll tell you. They're called, and you should get this in your list of notes, Kuhl, Kuhl. They're convertible pants. The bottom zips off so they turn into shorts. They're lightweight, wickable. They're quick drying, so I can hand wash them and hang them up, and they're dry in an hour. And I usually bring a second pair just of shorts along, but those are generally for spring, summer, fall. In colder times like the winter, I have a heavier pair of pants. I actually bought them at Costco of all places. One of the pairs has about 9 or 10 pockets in it, but the pocket that I like most is inside my right hip pocket. There's deep in there is a zipper, and I always, when I wear those, I put my valuables, like my wallet and my passport, if I'm carrying it, inside that pocket, because no one could possibly get in that pocket without me knowing it. I have a hard time getting my hand in it to get things out, and it's zippered. So yeah, Costco travel pants, Kuhls. There are lots of, I know Travel Smith has lots of types of travel pants, but I can really recommend the Kuhls I have. My wife has a pair as well. And I'll make sure you get a list of those in your notes. Mary Ellen.
I was surprised one time when I went to the old city of Jerusalem and I met my friend's cousin. He met us at one of the gates and we were just walking 2 blocks along the inside wall, and one of the young boys from the neighborhood ran up and tried to rip off my fanny pack. And I always thought the fanny pack was the safest way to carry everything. And I did have everything in there. And luckily, his cousin grabbed him by the neck and said, "I know your mother." Go home.
Wow.
But he could have had everything and taken off because he was very quick and he was just the right height. So,
you know,
I think pants with inside pockets and zippers is a good way to go.
Was that fanny pack around the front or the back?
It was in front.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. I always, one of my top 10 travel tips is, for example, when you're traveling with your passport, always have it on you in a pocket or something. Don't have it in something carried inside something. One of the reasons I give that tip is because I've known people that have been on a red-eye flight and the next morning they got up to get off the plane. And of course, the next morning means like 1 a.m. their time, and their body wants to be asleep and they're not very awake. And they've gotten off the plane and left a bag with their passport on the plane. And when they realized that 20 minutes later and went back to the plane, their bag was gone. So I know someone that got stuck in South Africa for a few days on a family trip because he left the bag on the plane with his passport in it. And I said, "Oh, well, one of my rules is that passport never leaves my body, nor does my wallet." And actually, I don't even spread things out when I'm on an airplane. I have a knapsack and I get out a book or watch a movie or something like that, or listen to some music with my phone. So yeah, that's a good warning, Mary Ellen. Even a fanny pack someone can try to take. One of the people in our class in this afternoon about solo travel gave some good advice. I really like this. She carries one of these carabiner clips with her. Okay, carabiner clips are these things that climbers use, and you can kind of clip them onto something real quickly, and then they hold on to it very firmly. She said that she clips her purse to her chair when she sits down, if she drapes the purse over the back of her chair, so somebody can't just come along and grab it. so someone can't run off with it. I thought that was a pretty good idea. I actually carry a few carabiners with me. I actually attach my camera to my knapsack strap with a carabiner clip. And that way it isn't it's hanging on the front of me. I have a small compact camera for travel, and that way it's always in front of me and I know where it is. And if I have to get the camera out, I can get the camera out of the case. Well, any more questions about protecting valuables, keeping yourself safe, and keeping yourself healthy? Any more insights?
I have a question. I know there's very few, or I haven't found them, clothes with zippers and hidden pockets for women versus men. I think they're more available. But what about those pouches that go over your neck that you tuck under your clothes, or that kind of stuff to keep your valuables close to you?
Let me mention first the Cools that I mentioned, KUHL. I get them. I bought mine at REI. Those are available for women as well as men. So that is
Okay.
one. REI, by the way, I just can't say enough about REI. I know there isn't one in every town. I wish there was one in my town. Good place to buy any kind of outdoor or travel clothing. But to get back to your point, Jeannie, I know what you're talking about. I have one of those. And they will keep your things safe underneath a shirt, underneath a fleece, or wherever. They're recommended. The one little thing about them, and the reason why I don't ever use one, is that they're kind of obvious. At least the one I have, and the ones I've seen, they're kind of obvious the way they often have like a little like thing in the back, and so you kind of look like a tourist. And so, your thing is they're safe. In other ways, you sort of mark yourself as a tourist, though quite honestly, most of us look like tourists when we go somewhere else. It's hard to blend in completely. I know you can blend in better or not in certain places. I get that. But those are worthwhile. I have one of those, and I've used it. I don't use it anymore because of the zippered pants I have. I also have a fleece with a zippered breast pocket, and that's actually where I can keep my cell phone or my passport. That's a good place to keep it because it's hard for someone to reach up there on your chest and get at something without you knowing it. So I also like those, or a jacket or something like that you can keep something in, as long as you're keeping that piece of clothing on. I would never recommend putting valuables in a article of clothing, which you might remove, if you're getting hot and you want to take something off. Make sure that whatever you're carrying, if you want to keep it safe, is in the piece of clothing you're always going to keep on.
Right. I know one of the ones I got was at one of the ski resort in Alaska. It's not as soft as some of those that go under your shirt, so it's pretty obvious. But I used that to hold my passport when I'm in line trying to get through things. So it's still on my body because I feel a little bit more safe at the airport when I'm checking in and things. But I've also done some things where I've tied the string around like a belt loop on my shorts and then tucked it inside my pants so it isn't so obvious.
There you go. And actually, I've often thought, if I could take this little adjustment thing off of that pouch, I would probably feel better because someone probably wouldn't notice then that I've got one of those passport things around my neck. I just know that sometimes I've been in an airport and we're getting ready to board an international flight, and I'll see a whole line of people and they've all got those around their neck and they look real obvious. I thought, I'm not sure I would want to arrive looking like that wherever we're going to be tomorrow. But I think, if you could get them so that little adjuster thing is off, maybe they probably would blend in. And I wouldn't say I wouldn't use one. It'd rather to be safe and look like a tourist than not be safe. That's my advice. Don't worry about that.
Well, when we take a lot of pictures, that makes us look like tourists too, of course.
It sure does. And people carry huge cameras.
I love taking pictures. So let me be looking like a tourist.
Well, the other thing I do is my camera actually has a strap that hangs around my neck, but then it's small and compact so I can tuck it away. I like that because then I never lose the camera. And I did travel somewhere once years ago. This is at least 10 years ago. I was traveling to England and I had my digital camera in my hand, didn't have a strap on it. And I was in a shop and I was looking at various things and I set the digital camera down. I actually was in the shop of a cathedral. And then 5 minutes later, I walked out of the shop and I wanted to take a picture and I looked around and my camera was no place. Oh, where'd that thing go? And I went back and I searched all over the shop and I finally found it just sitting on one of the display cases where I'd left it. And so ever since then, I've been very careful about making sure my camera is attached to a strap around my wrist when I'm using it. And then when I'm done with it, I put it away in a pouch, and I haven't lost a camera since then.
There you go. Yeah.
I have lost other things. I once spent an afternoon shopping in a bag full of things and set it down in a cafe or somewhere. I never did remember where I left it. I go back and buy all those things again. Any more questions or comments?
I'm not going to tell you how many of us have traveled, women, with things clipped into our brassieres.
Well, I can believe it, Nancy.
I'm not going to tell you, because then it'll, get around that we're tourists, because, you got a cup D on one side and a C on the other or something.
I've had women tell me that. That's why I know it. I've had women
It works, by Lord.
pat their chest and say, "This is where the valuables are." I'm like, okay.
If you're taking that off, something else has happened.
I tried the small neck backbone of when you run out of pocket money and you want to take it out. It's kind of, obvious. And I know that people pull things even from the neck. So I don't use them anymore. Have you worked around that? I've gone to bathroom to take money, but then if I have bags, I have to take everything to the bathroom with me.
Don't have all your money in there. You always tell where you can get to it too. I mean, you can divide and conquer.
You run out of pocket money and are in the middle of somewhere, then it's I don't use them anymore. I tried them, and that's unless I hear some novel way of using the bag, I won't use them.
I want to let Mary Ellen ask a question or make a comment in 1 second. I just, something you said, Carmen, reminded me that when you are getting cash from an ATM in another country, and again, that's where I would ask a local, where would you go to get cash from an ATM? Ask them. I always go in broad daylight with people around. I would never go at night. I would never go somewhere where no one was around, where felt like vulnerable and the only person. And I would also go only somewhere where what I was doing was completely, no one else could see it at all. In other words, they couldn't see my transaction. They couldn't see my PIN. They couldn't see how much cash I pulled out. They couldn't see me putting it into my wallet. In many countries, they do provide sort of secure little booths for ATMs. Sometimes they're out on the street. I just tell people, be very discreet. If I pulled a wad of 200 pounds out of a ATM in England and I'm on the street corner or somewhere that's out in the world, I just quietly and discreetly stick the whole wad in my pocket and then go somewhere else and adjust it and put it in a wallet. Mary Ellen, did you have a comment or question?
Well, about ATMs, I was in Tokyo for the first and only time. And that was only half the trip. The other half was South Korea. And I went to put my credit card in at the airport to send this package back home. And it ate my card. And it was a card that I had opened at the bank just for the trip. And it was the only time I had an ATM card from the bank for a trip. And so I was panicking, and they said, that all the people around me said, "Oh, it's okay. Do you have another card?" I said, "I do, but I'm not putting it in there because I have another 2 weeks in another country that I'm going to stay with people, and I can't take another chance." And so what happened was, it was because the bank said that they didn't flag it as me being out of the country. I said, "I don't know how." I opened it at the bank and said, "I'm only using this to go out of the country to Japan." Well, evidently I needed to call again. So it was too late. It ate the card.
That's actually a good point. You do need to tell banks or credit card companies that you're traveling abroad. And often you can do that online, but at my bank, which is a credit union, I always go in there before a trip and I tell them I'm leaving the country on this date and I'm going to be gone to that date. And they say, "Thank you for letting us know that." That's very good warning, Mary Ellen. Thank you for that.
And I did let them know, I told them it was only for that trip. It was a
And they still
designated
didn't record
amount
that
of money.
information. That's too bad.
Oh.
That's too bad.
It was a night, very scary.
Yeah, I can believe that.
Even if it's in the United States and you're going to another state, you should call your credit card company and say you're going to another state.
I've actually gotten emails from my credit card company if I put an airline trip, this is all US based, saying, oh, we see you have a trip coming up, because they know I bought the airline ticket. You don't have to call, it's already on our file. And if you do travel to the same place quite a bit, that becomes a normal location for you and they don't flag you. But I've had my new card flagged.
Another thing I've done is I carry the phone number of my credit union with me, so that, and what's in my phone, so I can call them if I need help. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. We're out of time. You've been a great group, and you'll get notes in an email from the class tonight, and you will have an opportunity to give me some feedback. I love feedback. John, are you waving goodbye?
Just saying thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming. Great to see you, Nancy, again. And please give me feedback. There are more travel classes tomorrow. I think tomorrow we're going to talk Airbnb, if anyone wants to know about Airbnb, making reservations. And I look forward to seeing all of you in more classes. Have a good night, everybody.
See you tomorrow.
Thanks. Bye-bye.